Hello everyone. So this was a donator request. I believe it's Intello. I couldn't find your name because nothing would allow me to click on anything. I lost power on Saturday, so I'm doing some videos on Sunday, which is today. And I got to work Saturday next week, so I got to try to get a bunch of videos done during the week, which I hate doing now. But that's a me problem, not a you problem. We're going to do break this down into 14-minute videos. So let's start with part one. Let's go.
And there was one final point that was left that time did not allow us.
Okay, so the audio is not a me issue. It is the audio. It's coming through on my right ear.
To elaborate on, and I think it is very relevant.
It's like it was on the last one. I apologize. It's nothing I can do.
And very important because this aspect demonstrates to us what our religion is, and it demonstrates to us the meaning of La ilaha illallah. Now, the interesting thing about the Jahili Arabs, the Arabs before Islam, was that they actually believed in the same God that we believe in, by the same name and the same attributes, and that is Allah. You see, they never depicted Allah as an idol. They made idols of Allat, of Al-Uzza, of Manat, of Hubal. They made idols of all of these beings, but they never made an idol of Allah. There was no idol called Allah, because they knew that Allah could not be represented by an idol. And they knew that Allah was their creator and their originator and their sustainer. Allah says in the Quran, if you were to ask them who created you, they would say Allah created us. If you were to ask them who sends the rain from the heavens, they would say Allah. If you were to ask them who supplies you your rizq, your food, they would say Allah. The Quran says if you were to ask them who is the Lord of the heavens and earth, they would say Allah. And this is interesting because their paganism is not like the paganism of modern religions. If you ask them who is their God, they will say Krishna or Buddha or something. These are groups who say, no, Allah is our God, and Allah is our creator, and Allah is our sustainer. And yet they are not Muslims. And we don't consider them to be Muslims, even though they say there is no creator other than Allah, and there is no sustainer other than Allah, and there is no Lord other than Allah. So when the Prophet ﷺ is coming to them, he's not coming with a new God. He's not coming with a new deity. They know it is Allah who created them. Yet why are they not Muslim? Well, because they're worshipping idols. Well, why are they worshipping idols when they know that Allah created them? The Quran tells us, Surah Zumar verse 3, Surah Zumar verse 3, Allah says that if you were to ask them, why are you worshipping these beings? They say, مَا نَعْبُدُهُمْ إِلَّا لِيُقَرِّبُونَ إِلَى اللَّهِ زُلْفَى. We're only worshipping these beings so that they can bring us closer to Allah. Notice the ultimate goal is Allah. These beings are stepping stones, they're intermediaries. They're simply...
That doesn't make any sense. Why would you pray to an intermediary? It's a good concept, what they're believing in, but the way they're going about it is wrong. If there was a faucet in front of me, and I said, man, I'd really like a drink, and you handed me a cup, and I filled that cup up, and then I poured some of it into my hand, and no, this is the easier way to drink it. You just look at me and say, hey, stupid, put your lips just on the glass and just drink it that way. No, this glass is too holy. I got to pour it into my dirty hand. And hopefully my dirty hand will tell this glass that I'm worthy of putting my lips on it. That seems backwards to me.
Tools we use to get to the grand deity, and that is Allah. Surah Yunus verse 18. Allah says they worship besides Allah these beings that are useless. And they say, these beings are our intercessors between us and Allah, our intermediaries. You see, we're too sinful, we're too unholy, and these beings are holy beings. So we go through them to get to the holiest of holy, and that is Allah. Now,
okay, but what's to say that God, Allah, would listen to them? What if he views them as unworthy to be prayed to? So he's not going to listen to any prayer that they receive or any person who's praying to them. He's going to treat it like, nah, they believe in me, just not enough to pray directly to me. Okay. All right.
Now notice here, this is very important because their shirk was not in rejecting Allah. It was not in saying, Allat and Al-Uzza created me. It was not in saying that Allat and Al-Uzza will resurrect me. No, they firmly believed Allah is the creator, sustainer, nourisher, everything. By name Allah, not Rama, Krishna, Buddha, Allah. Yet they're worshipping other than Allah and they say, we're too sinful. We need to use intermediaries to get to Allah. Now this is important because unfortunately we have Muslims in our times who fall prey to the exact same mentality. Word for word, letter for letter. We're sinful people. Change Allah to Wali. Change Uzza to Sheikh. Change Manat to Pir. And you get the exact same concept. We're too sinful people. We can't worship Allah directly. He's too holy. So we have to go through the saint. Or they will say you have to go through the Prophet ﷺ. We worship this being. We make prayer to this being. We sacrifice to this being. We invoke the blessings of this being because this being has a high status with Allah. He will plead our case to Allah. And all of us who have family back home, we know that this is unfortunately common amongst the Muslims around the world. And this mentality is exactly the mentality of the Jahili Arabs. It is exactly the same. And this is compounded by the fact that if somebody says, how dare you compare a pir to Allat? How do you compare my sheikh to Allat? The response is, what is Allat except a pir and a sheikh? What is Allat? Do you know the origins of Allat? Allat was the main idol of Ta'if, right? We said last time, what is the main idol of Mecca? Who can remind me? Hubal. The main idol of Mecca is Hubal. And this was the original idol. Where did it come from? Who can remind me? Syria. From the Amalekites, the Amaliqa. Came from the Amalekites. This is the original idol that was there until the Prophet ﷺ got rid of it in the conquest of Mecca. Then the second major idol was Allat. And that was in Ta'if. These were the two main idols. Allat and Hubal. And then Manat was the third, and Uzza. So these are the main idols. Now, Allat, what is Allat? Allat was a man who used to feed to the pilgrims a type of soup. And the word for making soup in Arabic is latta yaluttu. And Allat is the one who grinds. Allat is the one who basically does the thing to make the soup. The barley, you grind it and then you make the soup out of it. It's not his name, it's his title. And this was a man who would stand on the road towards Mecca, and everybody who went there, he's a generous man. He would feed them. And so they called him Allat, the one who gives the soup, the one who feeds, the one who makes the barley for the soup, Allat. When he died, they said, let's commemorate him. He's a good man, he's a righteous man. So they build a monument, a mausoleum. And in our religion, we're not supposed to build a monument on a grave because of this reason. Exactly because of this reason. So they said, let's commemorate him. He was a good man. So they built a big structure. And what happens when you build a big structure on a grave? People come, they rub their bodies on it, they put their hands on it, they want to get blessings. And bit by bit, slowly but surely, it becomes an idol and a god that is worshipped besides Allah. So what is Allat except a holy man, a righteous person? And we already mentioned before that the most common being who is invoked on earth besides Allah is Jesus Christ. The most common being that is worshipped besides the true God is Jesus Christ. What is Jesus Christ? An evil being or a good being? He's a good being. He is one of the greatest of all prophets and messengers. You see, the slippery slope doesn't occur with evil people. I mean, how few people worship shaitan, right? The Satanists, how few are they? And yet look at how many people worship Jesus Christ, in the billions. Because it's easy to slip with a good man. You put him above his place. You take him to a status above what he deserves. And this is what our religion came to prohibit. No.
That's actually a really good point. You elevate them. there, we kind of do that with everyone, people who die, though. You know, I don't know if it's a mourning respect kind of thing, but somebody maybe you don't get along with too well or whatever, and they die, you're like, yeah, he was a good father, though. You know, he was this, he was that. You know what I mean? Like you, or maybe somebody dies and you'll start telling a story, and you really emphasize the good in that person, or you tell one story and you make it seem like, yeah, but that's, you know, that's who he was, but it wasn't. I know I'm speaking from experience. I've heard stories about people and I'm like, no, not at all who they were. They were not a good person at all. You are incorrect in your statement, sir.
You don't worship anybody, including the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. You don't go through him to get to Allah, meaning you don't direct your prayers through him. You take him as a role model, and you don't take him as another god, a demigod, a semi-god. So it is important that we understand that the shirk of the Jahili Arabs was a very unique type of shirk. It is not the shirk of, let's say, the Hindus or the Buddhists or the Zoroastrians, because these groups, they believe in another god besides Allah. They don't believe in Allah. The God of the Arabs was the God of Abraham and Ismail and Ishaq, and that is Allah. That is the God that we believe in. Their shirk was not in rejecting him. It was in affirming him as being too holy. We can't get to him directly. We have to go indirectly. And it's very important that we as Muslims therefore understand what our religion is about, and that is there are no intermediaries between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that was the point related to the last lesson. Now we move on to today's lesson. And we began by pointing out, well, we just talked 2 lessons about how evil Jahili Arabia was, how bad it was. And next week, we're going to continue this. Dr. Bashar is going to be speaking next week. I won't be here. He'll talk about the social circumstances of Arabia. And again, so many evils taking place in Arabia. Now, if Arabia was so bad, was so evil, why did Allah choose Arabia and the Arabs for the Prophet ﷺ to come in? I mean, why didn't he choose the Romans, who were the mightiest civilization, or the Persians, who had an ancient civilization? Why didn't he choose another nation? Why in the can't say backwaters, the back sands of Arabia, why in this desert, in this nomadic lifestyle that didn't have a civilization, it didn't have a script, it didn't have anything, it didn't even have a government? Why did Allah choose this society to send the last prophet? Well, there are many wisdoms that we can derive, that we can glean from choosing these groups of people. First and foremost, the Arabs and Arabia was in between the 2 major superpowers of the time, and those were the Sassanids and the Byzantine Empire.
I would also like to say that the Romans were involved in the killing of Jesus. So if you were to give them a prophet, what's to say that they wouldn't have killed him? So, I mean, yeah.
Right, the Eastern Roman, the Byzantine Empire, and the Sassanid, or the Persians. The Romans and the Persians is simplified. The more correct is the Byzantine and the Sassanids. So Arabia is smack in the middle. Or you can say southmost, but it is in between. Wars are taking place right above Arabia, in the Syrian hemisphere or land. Wars are taking place for 400 years between the Byzantines and the Sassanids. Arabia is right there in the middle. Additionally, so it's geographically very uniquely situated. It's connected to the 2 greatest international superpowers. Yet it is distinct. Connected, but distinct. And subhanAllah, what happened in 30, 40 years? Arabia conquered these 2 superpowers, right? Had Arabia been in China, it would not have been able to conquer these 2 superpowers. By being connected and yet separate, just on the border. The very first lands of conquest, Allah willed that these 2 mighty nations be conquered by the Muslims within 20 years, within 30 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, as you all know. Additionally, the Arabs did not have a history of colonialism or aggressive behavior. Because the Arabs were busy fighting amongst themselves, they never challenged Rome, they never challenged Persia. So when the Arab armies first marched towards Rome and Persia, i.e. after Islam, the Romans and the Persians were laughing. Who are these Bedouins wanting to attack us? And it is said that the Sassanid emperor treated Sa'd and the other Muslim leaders as children. Because, are you gone crazy? Your armies are going to attack us? Go back and we'll give you some gold coins if you want. I mean, don't bother. They treated them like kids because they couldn't believe that a group is coming from Arabia. The Arabs never had a colonialist influence. They never were aggressive to the superpowers. So it was a surprise.
They also didn't have a civilizational structure of government of, you know, this is our land. They kind of just lived in that area in their little tribes. And so they were always looked past because they didn't have any structures. They didn't have any, at that time, what would have been modern. I'm sure they had wells. Clearly, they were in the desert, so they clearly had wells. They didn't have one form of government. They didn't have I almost said cathedrals, but that's, you know, they didn't have places to worship. They didn't have skyscrapers. Terrible way to say they didn't have buildings. They didn't have anything that the two superpowers would have had interest in. So when they showed up at the door, they looked at them as they looked at them for the past 400 years. Oh, that's cute. Oh, look at that guy. You know, there's no reason for them to have placed any respect onto them, because what had they done? Certainly not in war. They hadn't done anything in war to have established themselves to be a threat of any sort.
Is completely coming out of this land. Another point is that the fact that the Arabs did not have their own unique civilization. Now, what do I mean by civilization? Some people ask me, what do you mean they didn't? When I say they didn't have civilization, I mention certain benchmarks of a civilization. The first...
Are we about to be on the same page? Dr. Yasser, are you about to quote me?
Benchmark is a unified government. If you don't have a unified government,
country.
you don't have law and order in society. I mean, that's the first benchmark of a civilization. You have a unified government. And then another benchmark is literature, arts, architecture. Now, the Arabs did not have literature.
Okay.
They had poetry, which is one step less. They did not have written literature per se, because they didn't have reading and writing, right? Another benchmark is architecture, buildings. The Arabs did not have buildings. They didn't build anything of lasting significance. Whereas the Romans, I mean, today...
Okay. He said it much better than I did. So let's just say that I said what he said what I said, so I was right, and he was kind of right. Yeah, I was right. He was kind of right.
This day, the Hagia Sophia, it was built before the Prophet by 100 years, and it is still a marvel that we go in and we look at. You know, in Istanbul and in Constantinople and other places, the palaces of Persia, they're still around. Persepolis outside of Tehran, they're still around. You can go and see them. Magnificent structures. The Arabs at the time didn't have that. So again, I mean, I'm not trying to, I mean, some people, apparently there were one or two people that felt a bit offended when I said this, but it's a fact that Islam came and gave the Arabs izzah. Instead of being offended, they should take pride that Islam came and made the Arabs the top nation. Before Islam came, the Arabs were considered to be a backward Bedouin nation, and they were like that. And Allah says in the Quran, لَقَدْ أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكُمْ كِتَابًا فِيهِ ذِكْرُكُمْ. We have given you a book, in it is your legacy. Your dhikr, your legacy will be through this book. This is in the Quran. That you didn't have a legacy before this book came. Before this book came, you weren't anything. Now when this book comes, لَقَدْ أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكُمْ كِتَابًا فِيهِ ذِكْرُكُمْ. This will give you a legacy that people will look up to you by. Right? So this book came and civilized the Arabs. So the fact that the Arabs didn't have this civilization, they didn't have a unified government, they didn't have all of these factors, when Islam came, it made it easier for the Arabs to develop a unique and their own culture and civilization. There was no competition. If Islam had come to the Romans, it would have been very problematic, because they have their entire structure up and running. And for Islam to come there, you have to then fight the status quo. In Arabia, you can say there's somewhat of a vacuum. There is no status quo to fight. So when the Prophet ﷺ unites the Arabs for the first time, the wars that he's undertaking are relatively small. There's no mighty unified government that's attacking him. And this is of the blessings of Allah that He chose Arabia for this. The first time the Arabs were ever united is under the Prophet ﷺ. They were never united before him. He came and he united all the Arabs, all the descendants of Ismail. But before this, they were not united. And so the fact that they didn't have a civilization is in fact a blessing in disguise, because then Islam came and brought that civilization. And a unique Islamic civilization with its own language, its own literature, its own script, its own coinage even, its own everything came. Everything, even its own architectural style, as you know. The Umayyads had their own, the Abbasids had their own, the Andalusi, all of this came. It came because there was a vacuum. And so the Arabs came and they filled that vacuum with Islam, and they then brought forth a new civilization.
We're gonna pause it right there, and that's gonna be the end of episode 1, the birth of Prophet Muhammad. This was a donated request. Any donation is appreciated. It does help. You can request things if you donate. You can not donate, still request things. They just take longer. You can subscribe to the channel. Give a thumbs up. That helps almost as much as a donation. Give a thumbs down, then, you know, I'm probably wishing something terrible on you, like a button falls off of a coat or a shirt, and then as you're like, oh, I lost the button, oh no, and then you're mauled to death by a tiger. I don't really know how that one kind of comes together, but yeah, I'm happy with that. So until part 2, have a good day, have a good night.